I talk about Batman a lot on this channel, and this video is going to be another example of that. Whenever you're getting into Batman or comics in general, chances are you've looked up stories that are recommended for someone in your situation, and when you do that, you'll get a lot of the same suspects. These tend to be Batman Year One, which I do highly recommend as an early Batman story. It's still one of my favorites if you can't tell from the banner on my channel. Others include Long Halloween, Dark Knight Returns usually gets brought up, Killing Joke, Dark Victory sometimes will be brought in there, Court of Owls is mentioned as well, and Arkham Asylum, A Serious House on Serious Earth gets lumped in here for some reason, and I see Hush get lumped into the group more often than not, which I strongly disagree with due to the mounds of continuity that's wrapped up with that story to give it as much effect as it does for the people who like it, at least. In my opinion, The Man Who Laughs deserves to be right up there with those that are mostly mentioned. The story works as a sequel to Year One, and it's a general remake of the Joker's first appearance. The ending of Year One doesn't exactly line up with this story much because Joker is already up to something and named at that point, but just ignore that mistake. This was published in 2005, which is a very confused time as far as quality is concerned regarding Batman. We're dealing with something like War Games, which you can check out the video on my channel for how I feel about that. Same with City of Crime that came out around this time, and the very iconic, for not entirely good reasons, All-Star Batman and Robin released during this period as well. Meanwhile, on the horizon, you have Under the Hood, and then later on after that, you have the great runs by Paul Dini and the kind of controversial run by Grant Morrison, depending on who you are. The Man Who Laughs, meanwhile, was written by the amazing Ed Brubaker. I have nothing but good things to say about Ed Brubaker, and pencils are done by Doug Mahnke. Ed is one of my favorite comic book writers of all time, and he is no stranger to Batman, especially at this point. He had a run earlier on in the decade, and at the time of this publication, he is just coming off of his run on Catwoman, and also working on Gotham Central with Rucka, and he's just about to start his Captain America run, which I do think is very good. His writing style here is very in line with the noir crime thriller genre that he tends to dip in, especially with his creator-owned stuff like Kill or Be Killed, or Incognito, to use a more superhero adjacent type story as an example. There's even a few points throughout this where he gets a little bit Frank Miller-y in my opinion with the narration boxes, although it doesn't go all the way out like some of Frank's stuff tends to do. Speaking of the narration throughout this, it is split between both Batman and Gordon. When it changes perspective, it is almost seamless and just flows very naturally. Both characters really help sell the story with their point of view. It also helps flesh out a little bit of the world at that point in time and where the characters are at that point in their life. Since Year One, Gordon still remains on the police force as a captain, but he has become an established member and is also known as a hero cop at this point in his career. Through Gordon's perspective, we're really sold on the current climate at that point in Gotham City, similar to where we are at the start of Dark Knight. The period is all about escalation, where we start with mobsters and corrupt officers. We shift to a character like Red Hood, who is a bit more on the eccentric side, but still a little bit more grounded. And in this story, we're introduced to the Joker, which completely opens the can of worms regarding future Batman villains. Bruce, meanwhile, has become more efficient regarding both sides of his identity as a billionaire and as a vigilante. We have plenty of action in the story, but it also makes a point to highlight the detective aspect of Batman, which I appreciate since out of all the aspects of the character, that tends to be the one that gets sacrificed more often in the big notable stories. So I'm glad that at least this one has a good indication of that part. It's not the most complex or great example of him being a master sleuth, but it's there, and I think it does a good enough job for the type of story that this is trying to tell. Bruce is Batman for a majority of this story, but there are points where we get to see his opinion on Gotham society as a whole, which kind of helps fill the gaps in, and you get to see a little bit of Bruce's personality in that. At this point in their lives, Batman and Gordon's relationship is closer to what you would typically expect from them as a pair. Although there are points where Gordon is a bit more lax with how Batman operates than I'd like to think he would be at this point. Regardless of that, their dialogue feels very natural and their actions are cohesive. It's a very tightly knit duo and they operate really well off each other. Meanwhile, Joker in this story is already pretty well established as far as his characterization goes. He's very much in line with the best of the Bronze Age depictions, in my opinion. You could see a portrayal like this being adapted into something like the animated series like they did with Laughing Fish, for example. The relationship Joker has with Batman isn't really the two sides of the same coin thing that a lot of the more major stories like to push. I know some people are really into that aspect of the dynamic between the characters, but I think this is an okay enough introduction since I personally am not really a big fan of them being like that right off the bat. I prefer them to sort of grow to that instead of being naturally aware of this character dynamic that they have with each other. On the art side of things, Mankey is good, of course. If you read a lot of DC in the 2000s, you probably know him from his time on JLA or Green Lantern, or his Superman run from the late 90s into the 2000s. His art here is a bit more sketchy than I'm used to from him. It's not necessarily bad, it's just not as clean as something like his Green Lantern run, for example. It does look very of its era. If you've read a Batman title from the mid-2000s, I feel safe in saying that it's relatively on par with how a lot of that looks. But I do think the art matches the tone of the story and it works with the material well enough. And even though it's not my favorite example of his art, I think it's still very good. Overall, I think The Man Who Laughs is a pretty good intro-level story if you want to become a Batman fan or get into Batman comics at least. It covers a lot of groundwork that a lot of later stories will build on, or a lot of stories have built into them already. And as far as the Joker introduction goes, I think it's a relatively good one overall. The character feels pretty true to how he traditionally is. The writing is very theatrical as far as Joker is concerned, which I always want from him. And Batman is very straight-laced. He might be a little too aggressive for a few people's tastes, but considering how early on in his career he is, I can kind of let that slide, at least with one major moment that I've heard some people complain about near the end. But whether you're wanting to get into Batman comics or you just haven't read this one and you already are a fan, I highly recommend that you check this out. There's a graphic novel that's pretty easy to get your hands on at this point. The graphic novel includes a couple other short stories along with The Man Who Laughs, so you get a nice little package deal in it. And yeah, overall, I just want to thank you if you've listened to this far in the video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, share, all the fun algorithm-related stuff that YouTubers tell you to do. And I appreciate the feedback or recommendations. If you have any, just leave them in the comments. More Batman stuff is here on the channel. Other comic book related things, be it movies, video games, some Star Wars stuff is here. And if you just like that, stick around for more, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.